the bell. That means back in the room. Okay, yesterday we had an out-of-the-box keynote, and I know it was a bit emotional for folk. We've got a different one today. We're going to be joined by Joanne Flynn in a moment, and Joanne is really going to challenge us on embracing the sustainability challenge that we need to grab a hold of going forward, and how to pump prime that. And there's a phrase here that you've seen on the agenda, sustainability on steroids. Now that doesn't mean that you need to take steroids to do this piece, but certainly it's about accelerating it as quickly as possible. So I'm going to hand over to Joanne now.
Wow, thank you very, very much. Oh my God, so exciting. In my younger years, I used to try and leap up on stage, you know, do that whole dramatic thing. And then I realized you hit a point in your life where it'd be smarter to walk up gracefully and sensibly and not fall over. I can see a few people have seen and felt that moment. So, okay, firstly, I am absolutely delighted to be here with you. And for each and every one of you who's chosen to be here in this session, thank you very much. I know it has been a very, very packed program. ProcureCon always puts on a tremendous wealth of insight and knowledge. And sometimes you just hit a point where your brain goes, I've had as much as I can cope with. So congratulations for still being here. So a couple of things here. I introduced this, because it was such a cool photo shoot to be in at Ferrari. I seriously, getting that with the horse on the top, very, very cool. But I bring it in the room because the reality is each one of us have businesses that have some great successes, but also have consequences in what they do. So Ferrari as a business is spectacular. Who would like to have Ferrari as a car? You know, me, Ferrari, Aston Martin, I could say yes to either. They're both gorgeous. But they're both built on a system that is creating impact that we didn't have to account for. And this will be true of each and every one of us. So I have a question for each and every one of you. Do you intend to be alive in 7.5 years? I do. 7.5 years? Yeah, just checking. Hands up if you intend to be alive in 7.5 years. Okay. Those of you who are looking at me and going, why is she asking this question? I'm not sure I want to be alive in 7.5 years. Here's the simple thing. 7.5 years is 2030. I look at some of the dates when people talk about sustainability, and they seem like forever and out there. But let's be really personal. Most of us would like to be alive and healthy in 7.5 years. That's 2030. That's what 2030 is, 7.5 years of our life. 2050 is another big picture word that's out there, and it seems like it's forever away. Here's the deal. My mother is currently 82. She still does yoga every week. She plays tennis. She rocks. Isn't she? She's cool. My mom rocks. If I go up to be like my mom, I think I'm doing well. Now, I mention this because in 2050, I will be the same age my mother is now. So I invite you to think, what age will you be in 2050? Because the reality is, the decisions this room, that this collective makes today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and the next few years will directly impact the kind of world we have when we're that age. It's very, very simple. This is not theory. This is not fiction. It is very factual. We are in a position to influence. And that is somewhat scary, but also very, very exciting. Now, over the years, I have worked with a wide variety of organizations. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is coming in from the fact that I have run billion-dollar projects. I've worked for some of the biggest names in the world. I landed at 6:10 this morning, having spent 2 days in Bangalore facilitating a billion-dollar business transformation. So I'm speaking very much coming from someone who has lived and breathed business since day one. I ran my first $10 million business at 23. When I took it over, I discovered it had $1 million of unfunded debt. So we had to work out financing and delivery of value at the same time. So while I'm talking about sustainability, I'm very strongly coming in from the perspective of, as business people, we have choices, and those choices are things that we can influence, and they have a real difference on impact. So, with that said, as I said, what's the big idea? Now, the first one here, You've already been speaking about a fair amount. ESG. I've heard it come through several times. So I'm not going to beat around the bush about what ESG stands for. You know that. But here's the piece. When we start looking at in business, what does ESG mean? In the last 2 years, the shift from it being a lovely idea that maybe 5 to 10% of organizations care about because they're naturally warm, fuzzy sorts and they care about people and the environment, it has shifted into a very, very different world. There are now 3 questions that boards need to deal with. And if boards need to deal with it, it means we, as senior leaders in the organizations and heads of procurement, will be naturally dealing with the flow-on conversation. So, quick question, again, hands up. It's good exercise, you know, before lunch. I know there's also awards coming next too, so I'm not actually between you and lunch, I'm in between you and the awards, which will be curious. How many of you are part of a listed entity? Listed? Hands up? Listed? About half. Okay. So this is some of this is very, very specifically incredibly important if you're in a listed entity. If you're in an unlisted entity, I can feel some people going, okay, here's the reality. If your company wishes to be listed, you want to know this and deal with it now. And if you don't, it will make a difference in your ability to stay in business anyway over the next 4 years. So, pretty important. The top questions that boards are being asked, particularly if they're listed, is this. Listed boards have to declare financial statements, good old financial statements that the CFOs love and adore already. In Singapore, as of this year, in the US, and in numerous other jurisdictions, they also have to publish sustainability statements. Now, those sustainability statements have, to a fair extent, been glorious marketing statements of good intentions and actions. The SEC is reviewing them and saying, we want substance. SGX is reviewing them and saying, we want substance. So these statements are going to move from being not just lovely, glossy statements about sustainability, but needing to answer 3 very solid questions. What is climate doing to your business? How is it going to be affecting your assets and your ability to deliver over the long run? Secondly, what are you doing to climate? I.e., this is about that shift into ownership that our business decisions are contributing to these consequences. And then the third one is, what are you doing? The shift from it being a nice to have to being completely and utterly necessary, my prediction is that this year there'll be some tolerance for some fuzzy languages and data, but by next year, MAS is already signaling that they'll be auditing, okay? And the one thing I know, I've lived in Singapore a long time, when MAS signals, they're polite, they go, heads up, and then they go, we'll pick a couple. By the way, they'll probably pick a foreign company first to embarrass first, to give a Singapore company a chance to clean up. True or not, right? True or not? So for any of you that are internationals, you've got a little bit more space. But I know we've got many people here from Malaysia, and Malaysia is doing exactly the same thing. The CEO of Bursa Malaya has been on record multiple times in the last 2 years saying, if we do not clean up and be able to have transparency in what we do at an international standard, Malaysia will be blocked out of international supply chains. The license to operate at the most fundamental level. So these questions, while simple, are not at all fluffy. They are very, very powerful questions on what are we actually doing. Now, for your senior executives, which includes you, is anybody in the room a named individual? Anybody actually listed and named? No, you can relax. Your named individuals are the ones that are going to super care about this, but the consequences will be what they'll be coming through to you is this. As first, the reality is there is now massive opportunity coming out of sustainability as a way of operating. Yes, there are risks. And I was speaking with Jonathan earlier, and he was going like, Joanne, he said, but you're writing about that there's over 77 different standards. Which one do we pick? Would you like to know the secret of which one you pick? Pick one. Pick one and get on with it. Your industries will vary, so there'll be some that will be stronger based on your industry. But sitting there and going, let me go and spend a quarter or 6 months contemplating which standard is 6 months of time you've lost. And that 6 months of time over the next 4 years will be 6 months you go, you know what, I really want to have used well. So use it in action and refinement, don't use it in contemplation on which standard. The standards are converging. At the moment, IFRS, who does some of the major financial reporting standards, is going through SASB and TNFD and TCFD. Alphabet soup. I promise I'm not going to use too much alphabet soup in this one. Going through it and working out how to align. One of my colleagues is part of the review process on the papers that have come out, and one of the key challenges that they're looking at is saying, while there's financial implications, we also need to get clarity and transparency of data on physical world consequences, something that was talked about in the earlier session today. Because while there's numbers impact on financial, equally for those of us who want to be alive in 7.5 years in a good world, it's truly about carbon, it's about community, it's about society, and changes that are happening there. The other thing I want to put on the table is this, that already, currently, and presently, the general councils in the UK, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, South Africa, from Commonwealth historical jurisdictions, similar opinions are coming out to some extent in the USA, so depending on where your major operations on this will vary slightly. But if you're operating in any of those particular jurisdictions, which, wait a sec, we're in Singapore and Malaysia. We are. Is this. The General Council say currently under civil law, boards and directors have civil and criminal liability already that can be established, and they could already be taken to court on account of inaction. Coming from a very, very simple basis. And the simple basis is this. If we, as normal human beings walking around the streets, i.e. not in our professional roles, if we as regular human beings know about climate change, we know about the risks and issues, it is common knowledge. As senior executives and board members, it cannot be denied. It needs to be factored into business and actioned as present time issues, not as something that is possible out there. And this shift in legal liability is a fairly significant one because of a couple of other consequences that are coming down the line. Is when we start looking at this, what we're finding is historically as businesses, we've had to declare we are not trading while insolvent. With the declarations that are coming up on sustainability and the disclosures having an equivalent sign-off, in the next couple of years it will be, are we trading while unsustainable? Which means, as procurement leaders, the insights you have into your value chain and the partnerships that you create are going to be absolutely material to being able to answer this question. So it's not simply going to be about, can we go and get a better price point? It may be quite distinctly, this is actually not about getting a better price point, it's about getting a better ESG value system on the table, because the contingent liabilities that will exist for us if we don't are sufficiently large that from a trade-off point of view makes a lot more sense. So one of the things I find when I'm working with organizations is that when they look at all the different scenarios and things, it can feel slightly overwhelming. So I promised that one of my goals in this one was to simplify and give you a way of speaking about this in your organization that frankly is a way of putting it on steroids. Every organization needs to have an ambition. You could call it a pledge. What are you aiming for? You're either aiming to have a business that operates green, or you have a business that operates rusty. Now, we're in Asia. It's rusty because red is a powerful color, right? So it's rusty. It's a world that's degrading and not really a brilliant one. Anyone who's read the implications of what will happen if we continue on the kind of trajectories, it's not pleasant. Like I said, I was in India earlier this week. I do not want to be dealing with what Delhi is dealing with, which is 45 degrees on a regular basis. You know? I've lived in Singapore for 22 years. And I was speaking with Joe Augustin the other night, and I hadn't realized Joe Augustin had been done weather way back in the day. Did anybody else know? It was like a long time ago. So Joe was saying back when he did weather, the average temperature here that he would be reading out was 2 to 3 degrees lower. So in other words, in our easy last little while, there has been a significant change here. So it's rusty or green. And in that, to simplify the scenarios, it's very simple. Break it down into 2 sub-scenarios in the rusty and the green. One is this. If it's rusty, we're either acting for the diabolical scenario, which is over 5 degrees, or for a 3+ degree world. Or we're acting towards a green world, which is either going to be aiming for 1.5 degrees or less, net zero. If you really want to be gutsy, go for true zero, because that means you're not contributing. And some powerful organizations are already committing to go restorative, which means cleaning up the damage of the past. Because let's face it, there's been a fair amount of damage, witness the 2+ degrees that we've already seen. Now, here's the tough piece here. Our actions make a massive difference. There will be some parts of this room, and I'm not going to ask anyone to put their hands up, relax, whose businesses will be very firmly operating in dire and diabolical. The reality is, if one is in the heavy-duty carbon industries, one's in diabolical. Some of the built environment, given that built environment contributes 39% of the carbon emissions, pretty major contributors to diabolical. It means the way we construct and build and recycle buildings over the next few decades is going to have to change significantly. Material impacts there. And others will be going, you know what? No, we think we're good, we think we're green. So here's the piece. Coming out of COP26 in November last year, there were a series of pledges at the national level, which then are meant to roll down into country level. Big shift in COP26 was that we as businesses were signing up to say that we're making commitments to act in alignment with these particular targets. Now, heads up, they didn't go far enough. The national commitments did not go far enough. So anticipate over the next few years, the national commitments are going to get greater, and the accountabilities and the data reporting that will flow into business is only going to increase. So if you go and look at it, the International Energy Association said that they thought it was going to be at 1.8, so that's still getting close to the 1.5, but it's not across into 1.5. But Carbon Tracker, who's been tracking people's follow through on their pledges, says actually the pledges probably more amount to a 2.4. So in other words, still on a fairly strong pathway to dire. So the point is, the pressure to act is only going to continue to increase, and the expectation of transparency and accountability is going to only increase, which means value propositions are not solely about finances, they're about what the ESG impact is going to be. Now, here's something I'd like you to take into account, because many of you are sufficiently senior that you will be at the tables where this is important. S&P did a nice piece of analysis last year of their top 1,200 companies, and their output was this. 66% of those companies are unwittingly, and they use the word unwittingly, being polite. Some of you may be a little bit cynical and sort of go, no, they're quite knowing, but they're pretending. And that possibly would be a fair statement, because I don't actually think people in the room are stupid. But we are in a business system that has not had us factor in a whole series of the costs and expenses. We've been able to go, it's somebody else's problem, it's not in our legal entity, that's fine. But what they highlighted is in the Standard & Poor's top 1,200, is that 66% are currently investing on a pathway to 3.4. Now, if we go, we're going to have transparency coming through, and we're going audited data. That's going to become visible publicly, be part of the public statements, which means boards will be held accountable. And my experience in life and business is once the boards start having those little coals toasting, very rapidly it comes through the rest of the business saying, do something about it. If bribery and corruption is something that can flow through to board accountability, so can this. This is more difficult. So If you start taking this one, I want to leave you in part with a place of hope in this, because while I'm speaking fairly directly on where the data and the business challenges, because it's more than one business making a decision as this. Back when I was a kid, when actually was probably when most of you were a kid, Jonathan and I are the same kind of age. Jonathan, full disclosure, Jonathan and I worked together at PwC a while ago.
When we were young.
When we were young, exactly. Back 30 years ago, when sustainability and Rio Convention and some of these things came out, I heard about this. My father was an agricultural scientist. We lived in the Philippines. He was at Erie. And so I grew up with sustainability as part of the dinner conversation. Now, back in those days, the world was actually at what you might want to call an even worse stage than diabolical. You might actually want to call it deadly. 7-degree world was the pathway we were on 30 years ago. So in the last 30 years, we've managed to move from a pathway that is saying deadly, 7 plus degrees, 7 to 9 degrees was the trajectory that our economic system was on, to say we're somewhere in between that sort of 3.4-ish kind of range. We have made significant strides, okay? But what is really clear, we haven't come anywhere far enough yet. And the next couple of years is where the pressure is going to be mounting incredibly significantly on this one. So what it comes down to from a very practical point of view is this. Every decision we make is either a contribution into the rusty world or it's a contribution into the green world. It's actually that binary. Rusty or green. Which also means when we're thinking through procurement and what we're putting into our value chain, is how are we embedding sustainability as a design principle, as a value principle throughout that. Because I would hazard a guess that many of you have contracts that last several years, yes? That will be called a hangover. Because established contracts you have that may have significant footprints will now be things that you'll have to clean up or work through. It's a hangover, legacies, and that. Now, just to add to the fun of this one, some of you will be very familiar with this, others, this may not be something that's been spoken about a lot. But what is being asked for in the disclosures is this. Of course, what are we doing directly ourselves? Secondly, what's called scope 2, our energy that's being consumed. I.e., just because we're not using a coal-fired station, but we're using energy from a coal-fired station, we get to account for that. This third one, scope 3, is the one that is actually going to progressively over the course of the next couple of years, when I say couple, I mean the next 3 to 5 years, and in some cases is already happening right now. It's actually going to be looking at value chain. Now, historically, again, we're business people. Historically, we've been able to go, you know what, that's damaging, but we'll let some other organization do it. Separate legal entity, we don't have to count for it, right? Scope 3 says we do. The greenhouse gas protocol, which this structure is based on, has been around over 20 years. It's the fundamental one that's coming through when we're talking about the 6 major greenhouse gases, so carbon, methane, nitrous oxide, and a bunch of other ones. This fundamental principle will end up applying through all the different elements of ESG. Because it's pretty much very simple, saying we can't abrogate by going and passing it off to another legal entity. If we profit from it, it counts in hours. Now, those people who've actually gone and got the data, and not many organizations has necessarily gone and got the data, is this. Nestle, when they looked at it, they found that 92% of their carbon emissions was in scope 3. I.e., just over 7% was within their own direct control. The rest of it was how they created value. But as a business, because it's part of their value chain, they have an accountability, and now they're working pretty seriously on this one. Now, in Nestle's case, their major scope 3 things came from the fact that they have a lot of farm-originated things, and so it was coming off the production type processes, and you imagine if you're talking farms, the S in ESG is also going to be pretty significant there. Now, Procter & Gamble, when they did theirs, they came out in a similar order of magnitude. But for them, because of the products they had, even though we both say Nestle and P&G, FMCG, so you may think we're similar, for Procter & Gamble, what they found was that a significant part of their carbon emissions was in the customer use. And therefore, they've had to look at how do they design their customer use, their product, to reduce the carbon impact of the customer use side of things. And I'll highlight this because until you have the data, you do not know where this could be. And not many organizations have gone and got the data, and I'll just highlight it's not necessarily the world's most comfortable data to go and look at and see. So the question is, by when are you going to do some of these things? Earlier on, I asked about 2050. Personally, I'd like to think that by the time we're at 2050, we have a world that is at least as stable as this one. Though that said, an executive group I worked with, one of the executives said, we've just been commissioned to do a review of what happens if there's a 5-meter sea level rise. We're in Singapore. How far above water do you think we'd be in this room? 5 meters. We probably wouldn't be in this room. And that's very firmly on the table as a possibility, not as an out there one, but as something that's been factored into equations and considerations. So think about that. If you're setting up long-term relationships as procurement professionals, and I know that later on there's conversations going to be about life cycle, and some of these ones are going to be things that last years. How are you going to factor in some of the major scenarios that could happen, and how are you going to value mitigation that reduces the risk and the likely consequences? Because it's a different valuation structure that's going to be coming through as a consequence of these things. What needs to be happening by 2040? Because, you know, when we think about some of the build-outs it takes, the organization I was working with earlier this week, they went and said, look, we don't know how we're going to do it, but we're internally, not publicly, externally, they said internally, our goal is to work out how we can do this in 4 years. What kind of investments do we need? How do we need to retool our entire production lines? Where might we have assets that we need to retire? Like, what would it take to do it in 4 years? And they're a pretty big business. It'll take a lot of money. But on the other hand, coming through that investment timeline, they will be in an infinitely better thing. As procurement professionals, knowing some of the ESG risks that have come up multiple times in the last 2 days, would you prefer to be doing business with an organization who's thinking that way and acting and thinking through that way than someone who's not? Which would you prefer? The one who's thinking and planning and taking action? Or someone who's waiting and watching? I know for the future that I would like us to have, it's the ones that are in action. And so there may be very genuinely, very real commitments that you actually are doing internally to say, how do we do this by 2025, 2026? It's not board level long range, it's business LRP, long range planning over the next 3 years. Now, while I've spoken very, very much about climate as a starting point, I know from the conversations that have been had in the last 3 days, we've talked about social, but I also want to highlight from the point of view of there's conventions coming through around climate and carbon, which we've heard a lot about with COP26 and COP27 is pushing in it. There's structures that were in Kunming last year around biodiversity and increasing pressure and regulation will be coming through on that. There's water and marine resources has another one. There's a plastic convention that is underway. All of these I'm highlighting because the rules and regulations that will be coming through at a pace faster than many of us have seen. If we thought adapting to some of the transparency rules a decade ago during the GFC was a big thing, or dealing with what we've had to do in the last 2 years of COVID, we're going to have an equivalent sea change of where do we need insight, where do we need visibility, and where do we need different procurement and contract processes to factor these things in. So any preparation and action you do in the next 6 months highly valuable for you, because waiting will just simply mean that the guys who've already got planning, the group I was working with in the last 2 days, by the time we get to the end of this year, they will have a significant proportion of those plans well in action. I know, they've already got their procurement teams out for some of the things that have super long range on that one. So let's talk you and your businesses here. There's basically 3 ways you can look at it. Firstly, go, how many of my stakeholders are looking for change? Cumulative, some of it will be finance. In finance already, if you're out fundraising, my private equity insiders are telling me that last year it was 2 percentage points if you had a business with a better sustainability profile. 4 now. Anticipate in the next 2 years that 4 will go to 6 to 8, possibly even more. So material value from the point of view of what it's going to do for fundraising. And that's not talking about employees or other sorts of ones, or the fact that last year 25% of RFPs were asking, have you got some kind of sustainability plan? My guess, and I say it's a guess, when I did a check-in with my executive group 4 weeks ago, it was now at 95% expecting something. Right now, I would anticipate that you're asking for people like, do you have a plan? Next year, because if you need to do Scope 3 declarations, you're going, you know that plan? Can you show me some progress on this one? Data, transparency, and trust going to go way up. So how big is this? How big is this accumulation of stakeholder impact? And then secondly, look at it and say, how significant is this from the point of view of our business model implications? And I suspect when you look at that, you will see you can't sit by the side and go, we're going to observe. We can't simply make a pledge, and we can't take slow action. What we need to do is look at how we transform the way we look at our procurement, the way we design our products, and the way we deliver our services, and quite possibly some of our customers and business partners. So in summary, if you take it very practically, 3 Ps. What's the pledge? What's the plan? And how are you going to show progress? You're going to need to collaborate to accelerate, measure to reduce risk, and report for transparency. All of that's already coming at us, and in many cases, only going to get audited and expect more. So, I said I would be swift. Time is up. But the wonderful thing is I know we have lunch after the award ceremony. So I'm not going to get in the way of the next important part. Thank you.
We can just take, if there's any questions in the room, we could take one question. Does everybody have a question? I think everyone's looking forward to the awards. Many thanks, Joanne. That was very illuminated. It's interesting that Joanne talked about, well, she mentioned a hangover actually on the last day of a conference. Often there's quite a few people in the room who would have a hangover, but I think it was a very sobering presentation. And there's a stark choice now between rusty and green, and I think we know which one we need to select. And I think it's a very good lens to look through when we look at our contracting and how we behave with our suppliers and how we encourage our team. So many thanks for that, Joanna. I'm just waiting for Gladys to